push it up to 4.5 or whatever.
Yes.
If you want that, you need to be convinced you've got investments that are going to hit home. And you've got to be careful about not locking in too early. If you go too early on certain areas, you've got a problem. And then we have, as it were, Václav's four horsemen: steel, cement, ammonia, plastics. The challenge of substitution in all of those areas at a time we're building new cities, and we need these materials. Where we're feeding more people, we need ammonia. We need to get off of all of these things, but to do that immediately is a challenge. It's not just an energy challenge, it's a challenge across those industries in particular. And once you've got real solutions there, and we should be pushing for real solutions, then you might see us move from 1.7 to 2, 2.5, and 3. Remember, every year we invest, public and private investment, around $20 trillion a year. So there's scope for substantial change. But we've got to work at a lot of hard problems for that to happen.
Okay, I'm going to circle back to some of those targets and bring Václav back in. Monique, I think it'd be worth flagging for this audience. We've had great progress. 7 years ago, there was 1 billion people without access to electricity. It's now 675 million, so that's a positive, right, Jim? But 500 million people in Africa don't have access to electricity. I'm astonishingly alarmed at the fact that 2.3 billion people don't have access to cooking oil. And then there's this whole debate about environmental, social governance. We just had a roundtable in London with Puma Energy on trying to get the ESG criteria to match what Africa needs. Are the ESG criteria screening investment from Africa? You're based in the Congo. There's a lot of demand for raw materials. How do you convince this audience that it's time to invest in Africa? They're getting 1.6% of the global investment in energy today. It's extraordinarily low. Please.
So I think one of the issues is to look at the problem from the other side. Developing countries, I can talk for my region, our priority is first resiliency. Before we can implement these energy transition solutions, we first need to attack the problem that is affecting our daily lives. And so we need investment there first on adaptation projects and projects that will help us be resilient and contribute to this energy transition. That's of one. I think if we do that by investing in developing the grids, the existing grids that exist already, that will allow for the grids to be able to incorporate these energy transition solutions, which right now, it cannot hold that change that exists everywhere else. And therefore, it requires more investment. And it brings me to the second problem. We have the highest rate in terms of interest. It's extremely expensive to get a loan just in our region. And so when you look at the cost of the transition, the priority of the resiliency to the effects of climate change, you see that there is a disconnect with what can be provided by the industry and what is needed by the communities. And that gap needs to be really realigned for us to see less and less people not having access to energy.
Good. Sometimes there's a view that the ESG criteria, Jim, and then we'll bring Chantal into the debate, are used by the institutional investors not to invest in Africa or South America or parts of Southeast Asia. What's your view?
Well, I think the key thing, and I think you've really nailed this down, the high cost of capital in developing countries is a huge barrier. And the question then is how you use public funding in a cleverer way to kind of reduce the risks for private investors, because there is not enough public money in the world to solve our problems. We need to get private finance moving. The challenge there is to get the public sector to use its money cleverly to leverage up the funding that is absolutely needed. And maybe I can just add one thing, because adaptation was mentioned. For IPCC, this is going to be an adaptation-heavy cycle that we are going to be implementing over the next 5 or 6 years. There are funding gaps in mitigation, but the gaps in adaptation are even bigger and more difficult to get the private finance in.
But the reality is, too, governments are stretched. We had the global financial crisis of 2008 to 11, and then a pandemic, global pandemic. And this was reliant on state aid to invent and support breakthroughs on vaccines, but also to pay for the dislocated workers. So it's a very challenging time. Chantal, you're the closest on this panel to the people, if you will, as a vice mayor. You're hosting the World Energy Council. I think it's a good opportunity to see how you can make the transition work. There's a lot of investment coming into Rotterdam. Your transportation system's superb. So what is that? It's easy to get around, it's clean, it's efficient, it's like the rest of the city. What are you trying to do when it comes to energy and being a hub for investment? The port's fabled for its connectivity on the energy and merchandise trade. What are the priorities right now to push ahead with your net zero aspirations as a city?
Yeah, well, indeed, as a local government, we have our concerns up and foremost with our citizens. We really have to engage the Rotterdammer, our citizens, into this whole energy transition. And there we have this huge harbor that's responsible for like 20% of the emissions in the Netherlands. So we work closely together with the harbor, which is has a national sphere also. So they are trying to really implement hydrogen, shore power, wind energy, things like that. And we're working closely together to implement these strategies. But my interest is far more with the citizens of Rotterdam, because we see we have the investments in all this renewable energy. We have a clean transportation systems, not 100% clean. So we're really doing the hard things, the technological implementations. But what I really recognize right now is that we see that the citizens of Rotterdam, they need to really engage, and we have a lot and big steps to take, because people, they have to change their behavior. Their houses are going to be warmed in a different way, so their houses have to be changed. They have to get to electric cars. They have to consume, and we have to produce in different ways. And this social change is something that I'm really adamant about to engage in. But it's a difficult task.
Yeah, I'd love to bring you in on this, and that's part of humanizing energy, is it not? We're a little bit spoiled in the West, right? You flip a switch and you didn't really care about the source of that energy. When prices went up during the pandemic, it's like, oh, geez. And then the Russia-Ukraine crisis hit. Well, we have to pay 20%, 25, 30% more for our energy. How do we connect the average citizen, if you will, to the energy transitions that you're talking about, Angela?
Well, energy leaders have done a lousy job with energy literacy. And if you really want to connect, it's going to have to be through a conversation. And in that conversation, people are going to have to use the same words and mean the same things by them. And it is as simple as that. The first starting point is we're really going to have to engage more people and communities in making this energy transition happen. And we're going to have to use the same vocabulary and have the same understanding of what energy transitions mean. I think when I come to the social aspect, we spend an inordinate amount of time talking about technology, money, and supply. We really have to start engaging the pull of social transformation. People don't just want an energy transition because they want more energy. They want energy because it helps them do things, gives them better lives. What does better lives mean? And Václav will hear, is a great proponent of something called the Sankey diagram. Here's the resources, here's the production, you convert to this, you convert to this, you convert to this. And somewhere on the other side of the royal is a user. And I think the energy transition this time round is user first. What is the user-centric system? This is the point that Monique made. What are the needs of the people? What are the needs of the industries? And then what does that imply for building these supply structures and finance?
Good. We have a number of CEOs in the audience, everybody that works in the industry. You said something quite strong, saying that they're not communicating to the users. What is the responsibility of the World Energy Council in this process? What is the responsibility of an energy company to articulate to the world, this is what it takes to provide energy, and this is what we need to do to clean it up? Do you want to start, Angela, and I'll open it up to the rest? I know Jim's probably has some thoughts on this as well.
So I'll start with all the people in the room here. Who've we convened at Congress? You won't find us just convening CEOs and ministers. You'll find women, workers, future energy leaders, mayors, vulnerable communities, indigenous communities. This is the conversation we need to have. If we're going to have not just accelerate decarbonisation, but do it in a way which is just, orderly and inclusive, equitable, then we have to understand what demand needs. How is demand shifting? And not just use it as the projection of our demand into the future, but the world, the demanding future that's coming at us. The future energy is going to be much more demanding. So let's engage with that demand as a way of finding the solutions and then invest in them.
Mr. Skea, please.
Yeah, and I might draw on an experience which is not IPCC. Until a few months ago, I was chairing a Just Transition Commission in Scotland, where I come from. And this was exactly the kind of dialogue exercise that I think is absolutely essential if we're going to carry society as a whole with us. So there were businesses around the table, there were trade unions, there were environmental NGOs and representatives of civil society. And I have to say it was great for me because IPCC, your head can go into the clouds. This kept my feet firmly on the ground, which was very, very helpful. And I think, my biggest sense of triumph from it was that nobody walked away from the table at the end of the process. Everybody stuck with it. The companies, the trade unions, civil society, and the environmental NGOs. But I thought what was incredibly important is for the corporate sector, because we did have utilities around the table, we did have people pushing forward with hydrogen and CCS projects, is that the companies do it with a little bit of humility, if I can put it that way, and sit beside the other stakeholders in society and be part of that consensus and don't get too far ahead, if you see what I mean.
It's a very good conversation. Go ahead, Chantal.
Yes, I fully agree because when I look at Rotterdam, we are nearly the poorest city of the Netherlands. You might not have noticed it, but there are a lot of areas where people don't have a lot of money. So
you wouldn't know that by your shiny skyscrapers, that's for sure. They're all new.
We call it the city of two accelerations, two tempos. So we have the shiny skyscrapers, but we also have areas where people don't have a lot of money. And we are the second poorest city in the Netherlands. So and those people really have to be able to engage in this transition, but their worries, their sorrows are so much different than using renewable energy. They have different things on their minds. And I think what you said, I fully agree. We first have to address the topics people are concerned with and really engage and be empathetic about it before we can really help them in this transition.
I like that jazz analogy I was using. We're riffing around here, but it's really interesting. Topics that are rarely covered at an energy event, right? Because it's the nuts and bolts of how we get to 1.5. We wanted to take a look back at the first 100 years of the World Energy Council. It's not about the Council or the Congress, but the first 100 years of energy since 1924, if you want to put it that way. I talked about what oil demand was at the time, and the supplies of 1.9 million barrels a day. It's quite extraordinary where we are today. We wanted to take the pulse of Professor Smil on the 100 years of what has happened in energy, and then I'll come back to the panel thereafter. Let's roll that, please.
Actually, speaking as a historian of energy, one of my favorite hobbies, it's very easy to say. We don't know. We shouldn't pretend we know, and we are ignorant to an extent which we don't even realize. And I thought about this, when I was looking at your questions. I think one of the best things is to look at some of these similar 27-year periods. So we go to 1924, the first Congress. So you take 27 years ahead from 1924. In 1924, of course, there was no Saudi oil. There was no notion that he might be splitting atom. There was no mass-scale oil or gas international transportation. Right? Everything was coal. And it was just about the first year when we started to burn the pulverized coal. Until that time, we were burning coal, big lumps on a crane. So we started to pulverize the coal and fire it in suspension with high efficiency in large boilers in 1924. Then we go 27 years ahead in 1951. Okay? By 1951, we knew we could split the atom. We knew that there is a plenty of oil in the Middle East. We were starting the tankers bringing this oil to Europe and to Asia. You take another 37 years. You go to 1974, and I was just looking at some of the old records. In 1974, General Electric said that 37 years ahead, by 2001, 100% of US electricity will be not only nuclear generation, but about 80% of all that will be fast breeder reactors. Now the people in the audience don't know where it all ended, right? So that was 74. By early 1980s, the Congress said no more any fast breeder reactors, right? And of course, nuclear electricity now is supplying about 10% of the global energy demand, certainly nothing close to 100%.
So you can have a lot of projections is the message here from Václav, right? But the realities are very different. Now there's a target I'd love to weave into this that was not cemented as part of the final UAE consensus, but there was a tripling of nuclear energy by 22 countries by 2050 to actually serve the needs on a cleaner burning fuel. Do you want to jump into this, Ged, the first 100 and what we should be looking for? What stood out from what Václav said?
Let me just add one comment on what we've heard and get into that. And particularly on the user side, and I quote Václav on this, and that is, if you look at cars, for example, why do we need a 2-ton SUV? Why can't we have a 1-ton SUV? What role does regulation play in helping us to achieve mobility objectives? Is it may be less of a problem in an extraordinarily well-run city like Rotterdam, where you've got superb public transport, but in a lot of other places don't. I think secondly, we talk about rapid change. Significant part of energy use goes into buildings, and to recast buildings in the modern form doesn't just require money, it requires trained people who can put heat pumps into houses and so on. We have a very big job, and this is part of what I think Angela was saying. We forget the user side, and that's very important. So with that in mind, let me just say we haven't talked about users in the last clip. When we look at large-scale change, let's be positive in the following sense. If we go back to something like 1850, we look at 150 years of development, we did move on from, we'd already moved on from wood to coal, we were moving on from coal to oil to natural gas and other uses, which are referred to by Václav. What's particularly important here is we did decarbonize, but at a perilously low rate, about 1/3% per annum over that period, before we got concerned about climate change. So there is change, and we did reduce energy intensities as we shifted fuels. What has been immensely challenging in the last 2 decades has been the superb performance economically of countries that have moved out of, if I take China in the beginning of the period talked about, before the rapid takeoff, of moving to around about 10% per annum and beyond GDP growth. What we know is coming to growth late, we choose the best technologies available to do the job. And that you can grow very quickly. But it is challenging, for the global environmental system. So no excuses. We're all involved in this. But we have to get off these hard commitments that we have that perhaps impede change.
Good. Monique, what's your view on that? Jed's talking about some fundamental issues that need to be taking place with regards to buildings, often overlooked in the climate debate. Agriculture, often overlooked in the discussion about emissions. But in the case of Africa, where people are worried about having food on the table, having access to electricity, how do we leapfrog to make sure these technologies that are deployed to Africa that allow it to grow as a continent or as a country in the Congo, for example, and still meet the aspirations we have on climate mitigation?
So I'm going to start by saying that we are today the sum of what we've learned from yesterday. Today is Earth Day. And so Earth Day was created off an oil spill that happened in Santa Barbara in 1969. And activists were so adamant about changes in regulations and bringing awareness and education to the relationship between the economics and environment that they created Earth Day. And so that is an example of what we can learn from the past. And in my region, we are still learning to adapt to an environment that was not, for which we were not included in the conversation, right? So a lot of the countries in Africa are 60 years old or less. A lot of the countries are now beginning to get that capacity in terms of education, in terms of understanding the role that we play in a global system. And so that transition for us has to go at an incremental state. We will not go from not having electricity to hydrogen energy. We will not go from using coal to electric vehicles. That expectation for the rest of the world is just not realistic for us. And so there needs to be an understanding that that transition for us is going to be incremental. If we go from charcoal to sustainable charcoal, that is improvement. And that should be financed to the same degree as other incremental improvements elsewhere that have an energy that's way more advanced. So I think the concept of always reminding what's the starting point will help in then closing that gap, but it really has to be adapted to the realities that exist wherever we want to bring that change.
Good. I know everybody wanted to weigh in the first 100 years of the Congress and what's in store for the next 100. What's your perspective? I'll go to Chantal.
So the technology that wins is the technology that goes to scale. But what gets the technology to scale isn't more money. It's the pull of social demand, of behaviours and transformation, and what's useful in energy. And I would like to just go back a couple of centuries. We're here in Rotterdam. I think this is Energy and Earth Day. That's why we have People and Planet. Because we can't have an Earth Day and then an Energy Day and then we have another Earth Day. How do we pull these together? This is Congress, right? And we're here in the Netherlands. Where did the Netherlands originally get their windmills from? China,
Yes.
right? And we live in a world now that's got so many borders and it's so fragmented and there's so many barriers. But actually what we have to do is start thinking about, if the world consists of natural ecosystems, how do we organise ourselves as the energy change maker ecosystems to bring the change we want to see? And those look differently in different parts of the world. So 100 years in energy has taught us that there's no one size fits all, that technology and investment alone don't get us there, that there are multiple opportunities. We're not short of capital and technology. But what we really need to do is organise differently to make the change happen that we need to bring.
Good. Ray Dalio, Bridgewater Associates, noted, and I've been quoting it recently in some of the events I've been involved in, there's $200 trillion of private capital and $2 trillion within the development banks of the world, which can serve as guarantors, right? This is raised in our panel. but how do we make it more attractive for that capital to find a home, Jim? What do you think? And then Chantal, I'll come to you.
I mean, just to say that there's obviously enough money in the world to solve the climate challenge, both on adaptation, mitigation. The challenge is to get the money to flow to the right places. And I've suggested some of the things that multilateral development banks could be doing, for example, to get the money moving. But can I just do a reflection on the last 100 years? Because we have obviously seen huge energy transitions, but they've been driven by economic opportunity, innovation, and access to resources. For the first time now, we have a global challenge that is external to the industry, which involves steering the innovation, steering the economic opportunities, and perhaps foregoing access to some of the resources that we have established, particularly on fossil fuels, which we have mentioned. This is an absolutely extraordinary challenge in terms of its magnitude. It needs conversations between diplomacy at the international level, national policy making, city level planning, and the corporate sector. And it is a real big challenge to take it forward. And these conversations will be needed if the money is going to flow to where it is absolutely needed in the future, including for adaptation as well as for reducing emissions.
Okay, I'm going to come back to geopolitics. I know it's a sensitive issue, but I want you to have it in your mind because we're living in a period of, as I noted in the opening remarks, polycrisis and how it can stand in the way or hinder progress on transitions. But Chantal, let's get the perspective from you in Rotterdam, the 100 years that we're in energy and where you think the next 100 should look like. And are we obsessed with growth? This has been coming up in the last 5 years, that's the benchmark of success. We're growing 5%, we're growing 7%. India's growing 8-9%. But is that the quality of life we're looking for? What does that mean at the grassroots level here in a city?
Yeah. Well, even in a developed country like the Netherlands, like a wealthy country compared to a lot of other countries, even here, for a lot of people, energy is very expensive, too expensive. So the amount of their paycheck that's going to energy is high, including also housing. So the affordability and accessibility of energy is also a problem here in Rotterdam. For a lot of people. People don't warm their houses anymore. They're under blankets and things like that. So it's a problem that's in different countries, but it's also here in the Netherlands. And we should be really aware about that. So people, I think the last 100 years, we made this switch and there was a lot of energy with coal and you name it. It always went with welfare, with prosperity. And now we see, when we talk about energy, it's not about prosperity, it's about problems. And I don't want to over-problematize this whole issue, but it's something at a local level we really have to deal with. So there might be enough money, invest public, private, but we're not able to put it in the right direction. And I think so, just to what's already said, to really include our people, to make it a just and an inclusive transition. That's the main issue I'm facing right now, and I'm adamant to work on. And I really think you're right, like all these growth numbers, there should be more equally spread, the growth. So people should really be able to step in, to also participate and really believe that this transition will improve their lives as well.
The just transition that we've been talking about. I know you pretty well, so I see the wheels turning. Do you want to weigh in? And I'm going to go to Ged.
Well, I think that if we were, you mentioned geopolitics, and so the geopolitics in energy continues to evolve. It's extended beyond conventional oil and gas. It now includes critical supply chains and minerals. Who hasn't been talking about that? And those are needed. I mean, you can't have a renewable revolution without a lot more materials, without a lot more electrification, copper wire, etc. Right? But it also extends to data and technologies. Right? The geopolitics is much broader. And I think that what we're trying to do is think about how do we rise above geopolitics, because this is the future of humanity. This is a planetary and something that's been that we all have to deal with. There's no escaping. Mother Nature doesn't know about boundaries. And what we seem to be doing is, we're not trying to talk about, yes, there's nations, yes, there's cities, yes, there are territories, but there's also a lot of networks, there's value chains. How do we actually combine networks and nations? How do we get movement like that? It's a completely different model of governance, of change making. And we're doing it. I'm going to use something I've heard from another panelist. I'm sorry about this, I don't know if you're going to say it, but we've come out of COP28. The world is moving in another direction. We've agreed that we're going to transition away from fossil fuels in an orderly and just and equitable way. So we've got to combine urgency with equity, and the A in the middle of the UAE consensus is agency. So without these new models of agency, we don't get there. But we talk always about technology and money and not about people-centric, agency-centric transitions.
Excellent. I think it was Jim that brought it up in our earlier conversation. Jed, you want to weigh in here? You're a specialist in scenarios, right? And scenario planning when it comes to energy, as we saw from Václav's intervention there, GE thought it'd be 100% nuclear energy by a certain target, and we missed it completely. Please.
I think anybody who's worked in and around the energy industry would support Václav's insight. Things are continually changing. I'm interested in focusing now on the user side. I mean, the big question for me is, you don't like carbon in the system, it's tough to get it out. Why are we not all embracing a carbon price in one form or another? And yet on the other side, it's a tough time for many people. And the idea of increasing energy and not knowing where that increased cost, as it were, goes to, annoys a lot of people. So you've got to manage it. I think there's the internal politics of managing the existential need to address the climate change issue. And on the other side, the hard times that many people face. How we bring those together will be a true test of leadership. A lot of this is going to have to be at the country level. We talked a lot about global developments, but there are very good instances of governments stepping forward and very quickly changing energy use, where infrastructure that we have can be used, whether it's natural gas introduction into the Netherlands early on, which was done relatively quickly, whether it's LED lamps in Sweden, and you could run across the world and give examples. China's rapid development of cooking utensils and use over a fairly short period to solve some of the in-house problems, as they were.
It's the best practices that Angela was talking about, right? So this is where that collaboration of best in practice gets shared at a more rapid pace.
And we have, it's next practices. We've never managed global energy transitions before, so there isn't a book where somebody's got the answer and we're just transferring that knowledge. This is bold movements which learn quickly. Some of them aren't all going to work out. We've got to have a little more humility, not just in terms of not trying to control it, but maybe breaking it down. So rather than trying just very big global things, we advocate for hundreds of thousands of smaller steps to increase the pace of learning.
Good, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Napoleon who said, no battle plan ever survives first contact with the enemy. And I think that's a salutary lesson for anybody developing scenarios. And indeed, Ged, I think you spent a large part of your career trying to prepare organizations for surprises and change. So I think, we draw these sort of straight lines or gently bending curves into the future, but we know the reality is there are going to be shocks and changes as we move ahead. So for me, the key thing is that in making our plans, that we build optionality into them to think about different alternative futures and to have ourselves covered. That may not always be the most short-term, cost-effective thing to do, but building in that optionality, I think, is incredibly important.
Okay, before we go back to Václav and his views on demand, the panel suggested we should be talking about, and I think it's absolutely correct. I wanted to get Monique's views on, when you talk of demand, Congo is like the new belle at the ball, right? Everybody wants to get those strategic minerals and metals. How does a country with so much attention and so many natural resources which are in demand for the energy transition manage it? What's the percolating view from the Congo right now, Monique, that you can share with this audience?
We have a vision that Congo is part of the solution, and that Congo is the solution in many ways. We're the solution first because we have the second largest Congo Basin forest, so we are one of the lungs already existing. And then we're also the solution because we have the resources necessary for the energy transition. However, being the solution to others should not negate being a solution to ourselves first. And because we have such a need to bring up to speed our energy access in the country, we want to balance providing for others while also making sure that we are benefiting as we haven't years before from the resources we were given. And so I think that in many ways, we are looking at the energy transition as an opportunity, an economic opportunity, a development opportunity, and also a humanizing opportunity to continue to contribute to global's effort in this energy transition and bringing down the emissions. So I think that's how we are looking at the problem differently as one of the major players rather than one of the consumers or the receivers of solutions.
If I went through the Transparency International report, I wouldn't think the Congo would rank in the top 50% in the world. So what's the responsibility of the government there, if I can be blunt?
Good governance is important everywhere, and Congo is not going to be spared from that view. And we're working very hard to make sure that in all aspects of what we are doing, we are considering sustainability. And so that requires major changes in the way that we look at problems, in the way that our regulations, our legislations were set in place, because that was not the thinking at the time. And so we're having a lot of changes in terms of regulatory frameworks, legislation, and policies, and also penalties, taxes, and whatnot, to make sure that we are aligned both with not only providing energy transition, but making sure that the entire system and framework is aligned with that vision.
That's a lot of change. I see Jim's looking at me, and Angela. I think we're looking at 700% rise in demand for strategic minerals, for wind turbines and solar panels and battery storage. I mean, are we being anywhere realistic? Angela and Jim, you want to jump in? Go ahead.
I think really, I think there's wishful thinking. The technology is going to solve it for it, whatever technology. There's nihilistic thinking, we're not going to get there, and there's realistic hope. And realistic hope is a trier. It's always in the action. So how far we get towards those things and how much we substitute those materials with other things. Let's not forget, energy transition isn't happening in isolation. There's a materials transition going on. There's a petrochemicals transition going on. There's an agricultural transition going on. And it's all of these transitions together that's going to get us to the point where we are in a space between planetary boundaries and well-being of 9 billion people on this planet.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, and just to say one phrase that struck me in talking with the human rights communities is when you're talking about just transition, the challenge of transitioning in is just as big as the challenge of transitioning out, and that refers to the critical minerals kind of supply chains that we're looking at. And maybe just one other point to make, specifically for Monique and in the context of Africa. It is an incredibly important part of the world because of the importance of forestry and in the overall picture, as well as the supply of critical minerals. And at the moment, the energy sector is 75% of greenhouse gas emissions, and the other part of it is coming from land-related emissions. And if all our ambitions succeed, it will no longer be 75%. It will be a great deal less, and the importance of the land sector is really going to go up. So just to flag it, it's maybe a little outside the scope of this conference, but it's going to be very important in the future.
Good. I do find that the attention span in these conversations, when, like, for example, buildings, nobody talked about buildings in terms of emissions, and they're substantial. Nobody talked about the agriculture sector vis-a-vis oil and gas, or the transportation sector. So I think you raise an excellent point. I'd like to, go ahead, Chantal, then I'm going to go to the demand intervention, please.
Yeah, because I heard you say that, and I think it's also important that to include the discussion on circularity. In a local level, we are really striving for circularity, like for instance, the solar panels, we have made them circular right now, so we don't are dependent on importing them from China, for instance. We're making them themselves. So I think all the innovations in circularity is also helping us ahead. So circularity is an important subject as well in this discussion. As you mentioned, the building sector, I'm also responsible for the building sector in Rotterdam. So I know we are really ambitious in bio-based building right now. So you have CO2 neutral building, and that's wooden building and also circularity. So I think we can broaden this subject very easily to circularity, bio-based, and everything. So
good. I did promise I want to cover. We have 20 minutes left, about just under that. The demand side, because we keep on talking about supply, and I know you're quite passionate to get this into the debate. As I noted, as a fellow for the World Economic Forum, they're looking at demand and efficiency now finally as an issue. Why don't we look at the demand side to see where we can make progress? Let's listen to Professor Smil.
There is this thing called demand. We always think, oh, demand can go up, and we'll come up with these technical solutions to take care of the demand. But we should be looking at the demand as well. In this debate today, it's all about whatever, green hydrogen, super whatever, heat from cosmos. No, but there is this demand, and there is my favorite about demand, which is SUV. By 1985, there were no SUVs. But suddenly, 30 years later, 40 years later, SUVs everywhere. Now, was it so rational, instead of one-ton car, up to the time most cars were 1 ton a bit, to bring in 2-ton SUVs, and now to try to electrify 2-ton SUVs, making them even heavier, or the flying. This year we'll set the new record on flying. 9.5 billion people will fly. It is really necessary for 9.5 billion people flying every year. And this is one of the most difficult things to decarbonize, frankly. But somehow in this debate, this is all missing. They say, oh no, we cannot do anything about demand. Demand will just go its own sweet way, and we'll come up with technical solutions, right? Except technical solutions for giant container ships, for wide-body jetliners. Not so easy to decarbonize though. So I would just humbly suggest that we should also look how to sort of, moderate, restrain, manage demand, besides trying to come up with this wizard solution at the end. This is what is called the tailpipe solution, right? And tailpipe solution is not so smart, We should start, looking into what goes into the tank before it comes out of the tailpipe.
Excellent intervention there. It's true, SUVs didn't exist. EVs take a lot of minerals, right? They're heavy, they wear out your roads. The shipping industry, speaking of Rotterdam, they said, don't touch us, we can't have these technologies. The implementation's been a lot better with the carrot and stick approach, I think. Jim, you want to start on the demand side yourself? What did you take away from Professor Smil?
Well, sure. I mean, an interesting thing we did in the last IPCC cycle, in the last report, for the first time in IPCC's history, we got a chapter in on consumption and human behaviour. And it was a bit of an uphill struggle to persuade the governments to take it on, but we did it. And the approach we took was to start at the beginning and think, human beings have needs for shelter, they have needs for nutrition, they have needs for mobility. how could you meet these needs in a way that was consistent with low emissions? And the conclusion was that it is possible, in principle, to do that with 40 to 70% less greenhouse gas emissions, forgetting the supply side, just demand side measures to be able to do that. Now, that chapter fulfilled my ambitions in terms of stating what the potential prize was. It was less successful, and there's more work to be done in how you actually get to move in that particular direction, which is where you get all the issues about the SUVs, how much floor space people apply to, and the very difficult issue which IPCC raised in our last cycle about what people eat and its implications for greenhouse gas emissions. So we've put these issues on the table, the dining table, as it were. There's a big challenge, a lot of agenda still to be covered.
Good. Does the human species need a crisis to deliver solutions? Because global financial crisis, pandemic, Russia-Ukraine crisis, Europe moves very fast to find alternative supplies. Do we have to think outside of the crisis to get action or not? Angela?
Well, we would say if you want to avoid swinging from one crisis to another, start working with the World Energy Trilemma to understand how you manage your policy performance around multiple needs and how you do policy pathfinding. So, I don't think if the world has another crisis, we're overwhelmed with the crisis. That's the reality. It's not plain sailing. We're going to have to manage energy transitions into energy transition or out of certain energy transitions. We're going to have to manage those through crisis. And let's not forget, one of the biggest, we've had the world's first demand-led energy shock in recent years. That has not the same as the supply-led energy shocks of the 1970s. So if energy systems are like our backbone, we always take them for granted until they start to hurt. But we have to invest in them in a way that makes them flexible and able to have different bits that they're delivering, hands, head, hearts, legs, they're all multiple functions, and that's what we really need. We need a transition to much more flexible, connected and integrated, smart energy systems, and not forget that the digital revolution itself is a huge demand driver of energy.
But it also could provide some efficiencies as well.
It can provide efficiencies, but I think what we want is an energy, the world's energy system at the moment wastes about half the energy that actually gets produced. We want a system in the future which is less wasteful. I think efficiencies we have to be careful with, because if efficiencies remove resilience, or if efficiency means we get, but you don't, let's talk about allocative efficiency. Who gets first access to scarce, renewable resources? Is it the people who can pay for it, or the people who need it most? And how do we make those decisions?
Great. Chantal, you had your hand up.
Yeah, well, I fully agree with Angela is saying, and I just want to add to the discussion the role of local authorities or local governments, because I think the real thing we have to do is collaboration. And we have to think about new ways of collaboration between big companies, small local communities, governmental organizations, but also innovative enterprises. So all these people that are working on this energy transition or circularity, what have you, they should really find each other and talk. The conversation has to be inclusive, so everyone at the table to become, because it's a very complex issue, but if we talk the right language with each other, we really can make steps ahead. So that's what I'm doing right now with the City Council dialogue. Like hundreds of Rotterdamers are selected to talk about energy transition, 6 days long. They are doing it right now, and not right really at this moment, but yesterday. So 5 days ahead, talking about what is the energy transition for me. And I think we can help each other.
Good. Are you having the conversation that Jim was talking about? What are you eating?
Yeah, and because people feel I should do something with sustainability, but I don't know what, because it's so complex, and sometimes you get, oh, you're not allowed to fly anymore, to drive your car, or this, and people are feel this is not my transition.
Yeah, but Jed brought up this thing about the carbon tax. I mean, I think it'd be fairly easy to track how many flights we take every year, for example.
Yeah.
You hit a certain level, there's a carbon tax that goes in. I know it's pretty radical. I'm sure the airline industry doesn't want it, but go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I think we get into very difficult areas here. How far?
But as Jim was saying, that final 50% is going to be difficult, right? So isn't it time to have those difficult conversations?
Some of the current stuff is going to be difficult. I mean, how far do you want to be constrained in terms of what you can use if the options are not there? The challenge is there is a circularity, but it isn't necessarily the environmental circularity. People need to feel confident that they're not being totally imposed upon. I can imagine the micropolitics as being very difficult. It works in some places and not in others. And many people will say, well, why can't you eat less? But some people will say in response, I only have one meal a day, and it's pretty tough to go down from 1 to 0. Let's be frank here. These are difficult processes which will turn politics upside down. The question then is, what are the best policy sets? And the trilemma can help. But it goes to some extent beyond the trilemma. There are quite different solutions in different countries. Not pretty, perhaps. I'm not sure it's forecastable, the outcomes. And you need tools, I think, like carbon charging in some form or another. You tell me you have discussions about this every day.
You want to weigh in, Jim? Are we uncomfortable talking about things about the carrot and stick approach and restricting usage and reducing demand? We see meat demand, for example, in the UK, where I'm living now, dropping quite significantly.
Yeah, sure. And just to say, IPCC will never tell people what to eat. It is absolutely true. We'll say, if you eat this, these are the consequences.
I'm really happy you didn't want to step yourself into trouble there.
We know our limits.
Yes.
But yeah, these are extremely difficult conversations that we have to have. And I think it's right that science brings the issues to the table, but after that it's a political decision, it's political conversation, and as Ged says, it will be very locally specific. We cannot tell people, pastoralists in East Africa to eat less meat. You just cannot do that. People need to eat.
Good. How would you say, Chantal, that the government should handle that? So you're, at the grassroots level, if you will, you're vice mayor in the city. How sensitive is it going to be in 10 years? Here at the World Energy Congress, we have this exercise going on with our expert that you brought in to just start looking at the carbon tax that we had in the food consumption last night at the awards dinner. And there's going to be various signs out there for us to think differently. Are you thinking that way at the City Council?
Yeah, well, we are not able as a City Council to implement taxes, but what we do, I want to make it attractive to eat differently. So we have like vegetarian types of snacks that look like the meat snacks, and people are really embracing it. I don't believe we should be strongly negative about eating meat, for instance, because if you do so, people really start eating meat. Because they do the opposite, they go the opposite direction. That's, I firmly believe that to be too moralistic will drive people away. So we have to make it attractive and more like we'll join in. That's the way we do it. And I think I see progress now. Like a big hospital in the Erasmus MC, they have changed their menu completely. Far less meat, more healthy. So it's not only the attractive part, it's also the health cards that really works in, for instance, hospitals.
Okay.
So you have to find
Move the
different
system.
ways.
I just wonder if we have to move at a faster pace is the issue. I'm going to ask the organizing team with Heidi and Cassie, can we bring up the graphics? I know there's a graphic illustration that's been drawn up, and I just wanted to find out what the debate looks like today. So if you can bring that up to the fore when you get a chance. I saw it pop up earlier. So there's a live graphic being put up. There we go. So let's all take a look at itself and what we've covered in the first 45 minutes in front of our panel as well. Realistic and adapted incremental transitions, we've all discussed that. Private-public collaboration, behavior of citizens, changes locally, that's thanks to you, Chantal. Need to develop resilience. It's 2.3 billion people with no access to cooking, but I hope it's not 3.2, because they have the numbers wrong. Effective decarbonization, which is a major issue we've talked about as well. We put a lot of hope into carbon capture and utilization and storage in the oil and gas industry, but we don't see the deployment at a very fast pace. We only have 5 minutes left, and I wanted to give you the optionality to address advice for the future energy leaders, or a message of calamity or a message of hope that you want to leave on the first day. I'm going to let Angela go last. Very quickly, Ged. Monique, we got to hear from you on this as well.
Very simple. Technically, look at where you are in the context of the Sankey diagram. In the process of going from primary right down to use, where are you situated? And then search around. Get your bearings about the next big steps you're going to do to move beyond the borders of your own operation. And fight. Fight for change, positive change. Because it does matter that we've got a world that's healthy, and people are fed, and we've got really bright futures. And we have a great generation to allow that to happen.
Yeah, they're moving in a very fast way. Monique, can you want to touch the future energy leaders? You are one. How do you inspire the next generation of like-minded people?
I think here action should resonate in our communities, and that will bring the real transformational change. And how do you get that change? You have to look at what is success in your community. Bring that answer to, if you're in the private sector, then you bring it to the company when you are working on projects and programs. If you are not in a company, build one, start one with the answer that you found. If you are in the public sector, then you bring that change by looking at the regulatory and the legislation that exists and provide solutions to what already exists. But whatever action that we pull, energy leaders, we have to bring that action back into the communities. That will bring the real transitional.
Great. I'm sorry to do this to you, but Jim, can you do this in a minute? Chantal and Angela, 1 minute each.
Okay, in IPCC we constantly debate how to message the science, and our particular worry is that we make the risk seem so overwhelming that it induces paralysis, which is why Angela mentioned it, the importance of agency. Human beings, we can choose our own future, and I think that is incredibly important. Now, just one certain realism is incredibly important, but beware of the slide from realism into fatalism. We must maintain hope, optimism, and agency, and that would be my message for new leaders.
Great. Chantal? Thanks.
I really believe in the aspect of hope. That's really necessary.
If you don't have hope, we're in deep trouble right now.
We are in deep trouble, so I really think...
Geopolitics and climate.
So I really wish you hope in this Congress, and in this Congress also to find inspiring collaborations, and also think, well, that's what I'm going to do next after this Congress. I really hope that you can, all the inspiration you get in this Congress can put into action afterwards.
Great. Angela?
We have 4 days to turn a moment of mistrust into a movement of change making. Everyone in the room is a change maker. You can't do it on your own. Collaboration is key, and the models of collaboration are changing.
Good. Can I congratulate you on coming up with this format? It's the first time I've done that. I've been doing this for a long, long time. But just to leave it open, bring in an expert that shares his thoughts, and Vakov Smil, who's excellent, brought up some very different perspectives, and we had a really diverse group of people that are willing to talk the truth, and with both the awareness of what needs to happen, but some hope for the future. Can we give a nice round of applause to Angela, Chantal, great to meet you.